John Harper had always been a dreamer, but he was also a doer. For as long as he could remember, he'd imagined a life surrounded by open skies, green pastures, and the simple joys of working with his hands. Growing up in the city, that dream felt distant, almost impossible. But John wasn't one to give up easily. He saved every penny from his job at a construction company, lived frugally, and spent weekends researching rural properties online. Finally, after years of sacrifice, he found it, a beautiful 20-acre ranch nestled in the rolling hills just outside town. The moment John stepped onto the land, he knew it was perfect. The air smelled fresh, carrying hints of wildflowers and earth. A small creek meandered through the property, its gentle gurgling music to his ears. There were wide-open fields where sunlight danced on the grass, and clusters of trees provided shade during hot summer days. It wasn't just a piece of land. It felt like home before he even signed the papers. Once the ranch officially belonged to him, John threw himself into transforming it into his dream sanctuary. He built sturdy wooden fences to mark the boundaries, hammered posts deep into the ground, and strung barbed wire along the edges to keep livestock safe. He cleared patches of overgrown brush, planted rows of vegetables in a modest garden, and set up paddocks for his 2 horses, Daisy and Buck. Every morning, he woke up early, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and walked the perimeter of his land, imagining all the possibilities ahead. Life on the ranch suited John perfectly. He loved the quiet solitude, broken only by the sounds of nature, the chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves in the wind, or the occasional snort of his cattle grazing nearby. On weekends, he invited friends over for barbecues, showing off his hard work with pride. They'd sit around a campfire under the stars, sharing stories and laughing late into the night. Neighbors often stopped by to introduce themselves, curious about the new guy who seemed so passionate about his land. Most were friendly, exchanging tips about farming or offering help when needed. To blend in with the community, John joined the local homeowners association, HOA, though he didn't think much of it at first. The HOA meetings were held once a month in a neighbor's barn, and they mostly discussed mundane topics like road maintenance or organizing annual events. Everyone seemed nice enough, and John appreciated the sense of camaraderie. He never imagined that this group of neighbors would become anything more than acquaintances, or that they'd turn his peaceful life upside down. For nearly 2 years, everything went smoothly. John settled into a rhythm, balancing hard work with moments of contentment. His ranch flourished, becoming exactly what he'd envisioned. But little did he know, trouble was brewing beneath the surface. Unbeknownst to him, some members of the HOA had started whispering about his land. Old maps, dusty legal documents, and vague zoning laws were pulled out of storage, sparking conversations that would soon spiral out of control. While John focused on tending to his crops and caring for his animals, forces beyond his control were aligning against him, threatening to shatter the peace he'd worked so hard to create. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air feels fresh and invigorating, with leaves crunching underfoot as John stepped outside to collect his mail. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across his ranch. He flipped through the usual stack of bills and advertisements, but one envelope stood out, a plain white one with no return address, marked Official Correspondence. His stomach tightened as he tore it open. Inside was a letter from the HOA board, written in formal language that made John's head spin. It stated that after reviewing old zoning laws and property records, they had determined parts of his land were classified as community land. According to them, this designation meant certain trails crossing his property belonged to all members of the HOA and should be accessible to everyone. The letter demanded he remove any obstacles blocking these trails or face legal action. At first, John thought it was a joke. How could someone else claim ownership over land he'd bought, paid for, and worked tirelessly to improve? He reread the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into his chest like a weight. This wasn't just about sharing space. It felt personal, like an invasion. His mind raced with questions. Why now? What did they really want? And how could something like this happen without him knowing? Determined to get answers, John called the HOA president, a man named Roger, who lived a few miles down the road. When Roger finally picked up, his tone was calm but firm. "John," he said, "we're not trying to take anything away from you. These trails have been here for decades, long before you bought the place. We're just asking you to honor what's always been part of the community." "But this is my property," John shot back, his voice rising. "I didn't sign up for this when I joined your little club. You can't just change the rules overnight and expect me to hand over my land." Roger sighed heavily, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Look, we don't want trouble, but the law is on our side. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to involve lawyers. Let's try to work this out peacefully, okay?" The call ended abruptly, leaving John fuming. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Peaceful. They were threatening to sue him over land he poured his heart and soul into. Over the next few days, John spent hours poring over documents related to his purchase. Title deeds, survey maps, everything. To his relief, nothing indicated his property was ever considered community land. But the HOA's claim gnawed at him, planting seeds of doubt. Had he missed something during the buying process? Was there fine print buried somewhere he hadn't noticed? As the days passed, John began noticing subtle changes around his ranch. Anonymous flyers appeared on his gate, accusing him of being selfish and anti-community. Some neighbors avoided eye contact when they saw him, while others gave him icy stares. Then came the worst part. People started trespassing. Dogs were walked along the disputed trails, tires screeched as cars drove too close to his fence line. And one evening, he even caught a group of teenagers playing frisbee near his barn. Each incident chipped away at his patience, fueling his frustration. John knew he couldn't sit back and let this happen. Something inside him snapped. He wasn't going to roll over and give up his hard-earned dream without a fight. As he stood on his porch that night, staring out at the darkened fields, a plan began forming in his mind. Whatever it took, he would protect his land and send a clear message to anyone thinking they could walk all over him. John Harper wasn't the type to back down from a fight, especially when it came to something as important as his ranch. The HOA's demands had ignited a fire in him, and he was determined to protect what he'd worked so hard to build. But before he could act, he needed answers. That meant digging deeper into the legal side of things. He hired a lawyer named Lisa Martinez, who specialized in property disputes. She was sharp, no nonsense, and exactly what John needed at that moment. Lisa listened intently as John explained the situation, nodding occasionally while flipping through the stack of documents he'd brought. When she finally spoke, her words were measured but firm. "This isn't going to be easy," she said, "but we can challenge their claim if we find evidence that disproves it." Together, they began combing through old maps, zoning laws, and property records. It was tedious work, but John refused to give up. Every evening after finishing chores on the ranch, he'd sit at his kitchen table surrounded by papers, determined to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, tensions with his neighbors continued to escalate. The flyers accusing him of being selfish multiplied, plastered not just on his gate, but also around the community bulletin boards. Some people whispered about him at the local grocery store, casting judgmental glances whenever he passed by. Others openly confronted him, demanding he'd do the right thing and share his land. John tried to stay calm, explaining repeatedly that this wasn't about generosity, it was about fairness. His arguments fell on deaf ears. One afternoon, while checking the fence line near the creek, John spotted a man walking his dog across his property. The sight made his blood boil. "Excuse me," he called out, raising his voice enough to get the man's attention. "You're trespassing. This is private land." The man stopped mid-step, looking annoyed. "Private? The HOA says this trail belongs to everyone. You can't just close it off because you feel like it." John shot back. stepping closer. "And I will. If you don't leave now, I'll call the sheriff." The man muttered something under his breath, but eventually turned around, dragging his reluctant dog behind him. As John watched them go, he realized this wouldn't be the last time someone tried to test his boundaries. Something drastic needed to happen, something that would make people think twice about crossing onto his land. That night, unable to sleep, John paced the length of his living room. He thought about the countless hours he'd spent building fences, planting crops, and caring for his animals. He thought about the sacrifices he'd made to buy this place and how much it meant to him. And then, an idea struck him: an electrified fence. It wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. A clear message to anyone who doubted his resolve. This was his land, and he would defend it. The next day, John ordered materials for the fence and hired a contractor to help install it. Over the course of a week, tall metal posts went up along the entire perimeter of his ranch, connected by wires charged with low-voltage electricity. He added bright yellow warning signs every few feet, making sure no one could claim ignorance. By the time the job was done, the fence loomed imposingly, both functional and intimidating. News of the electrified fence spread quickly. Neighbors talked about it over coffee. Kids dared each other to touch it, though none actually did. And soon the whole community knew what John had done. Some called it extreme. Others said it was justified. Either way, it became the talk of the town. A bold statement that John Harper wasn't backing down anytime soon. The electrified fence quickly became the center of attention in the community. It wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a line drawn in the sand, a declaration that John Harper wasn't going to let anyone push him around. But it also became a magnet for conflict, drawing neighbors who were either curious, angry, or both. Tensions simmered for days, but one evening, they finally boiled over. It started with a group of about 10 HOA members gathering outside John's gate. They arrived in cars and trucks, parking haphazardly along the dirt road leading to his property. Some carried signs that read, "Share the trails," and "Community over selfishness." Others held flashlights and bullhorns, ready to make their voices heard. The air buzzed with energy as the group exchanged heated whispers, their frustration palpable even from a distance. John saw them coming from his kitchen window and immediately stepped outside to confront them. He wore his work boots, jeans, and a flannel shirt, looking every bit the rugged rancher he was. In one hand, he held a flashlight. In the other, a bullhorn he borrowed from a friend. As he approached the gate, the crowd quieted momentarily, their eyes locked on him. "This is private property," John announced, his voice amplified by the bullhorn. "You're trespassing. Turn around and go home." One man stepped forward, a tall, broad-shouldered neighbor named Carl who had always been vocal at HOA meetings. "We're not leaving, John," he said, crossing his arms. "This isn't just your land anymore. These trails belong to all of us." "No, they don't," John shot back, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I bought this land fair and square. You want access. Buy your own ranch." The exchange grew louder, with others chiming in, shouting accusations and insults. Someone called John stubborn. Another accused him of being greedy. The noise escalated until it felt like chaos. Then, out of nowhere, a younger man, likely someone's son, decided to prove a point. Ignoring the warning signs posted along the fence, he grabbed onto one of the metal posts, trying to climb over. "Don't!" John yelled, rushing toward him. But it was too late. The man yelped in pain as the low-voltage current shocked him, causing him to stumble backward and fall onto the ground. For a moment, there was silence. Everyone stared, wide-eyed, as the man scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt off his jeans. "I'm fine," he muttered defensively, though his face flushed red with embarrassment. No one was seriously hurt, but the incident sent shockwaves through the group. Some looked horrified, while others glared at John as if he'd intentionally harmed the man. "You see what you've done," Carl shouted, pointing an accusing finger at John. "This is dangerous. You're acting like some kind of outlaw. And you're acting like thieves," John retorted, standing his ground. "If you don't respect my boundaries, this is what happens. Don't blame me when you ignore the warnings." The standoff continued for nearly an hour, with neither side willing to back down. Eventually, the group dispersed, muttering under their breaths and casting dark looks over their shoulders. But the damage was done. Word of the confrontation and the shocking incident spread like wildfire. By morning, local news outlets picked up the story, turning what had been a neighborhood dispute into a full-blown spectacle. For John, the night was exhausting but clarifying. He knew the fight was far from over, but he also knew he'd made his position crystal clear. His electrified fence wasn't just a deterrent, it was a symbol of his determination to protect his dream, no matter the cost. The electrified fence incident catapulted John Harper's battle with the HOA into the public spotlight. Local news channels ran stories about the feud, dubbing it the Great Ranch Divide. Reporters swarmed the area, interviewing neighbors, snapping photos of the imposing fence, and speculating about whether John was a hero or a villain. Social media exploded with opinions, hashtags like #JusticeForJohn and #ShareTheTrails trending for days. Some people praised him as a defender of private property rights, while others branded him reckless and unreasonable. The sudden attention was overwhelming, but John refused to let it distract him from his goal, protecting his land. Behind the scenes, the legal battle intensified. With Lisa Martinez by his side, John prepared to face the HOA in court. They filed motions challenging the association's interpretation of zoning laws and demanded evidence to support their claim that parts of his ranch were community land. Lisa was relentless, poring over decades-old documents and consulting experts to build a solid case. But the process was grueling. Endless hours spent strategizing, drafting arguments, and countering accusations. Every setback tested John's patience, but he reminded himself why he was fighting. This wasn't just about winning, it was about justice. Meanwhile, the tension spilled over into daily life. Protesters began camping near John's property line, refusing to leave despite his repeated warnings. They set up tents, hung banners on trees, and even organized marches along the road leading to his ranch. At first, John tried to ignore them, focusing instead on his animals and crops. But their presence grew harder to tolerate. Car horns honked at all hours, loudspeakers blared slogans, and some protesters deliberately trespassed onto his land, daring him to react. It felt less like a neighborhood dispute and more like a siege. One particularly frustrating morning, John woke up to find a group of protesters standing dangerously close to the electrified fence, holding signs that read, "No man is an island," and "Community First." He stormed outside, frustration boiling over. "Get off my property," he shouted, waving his arms. "You're trespassing." A woman in the group stepped forward, her tone defiant. "We're not afraid of your fence, John. You can't scare us away." "Then maybe you'll listen to this," he replied, pulling out his phone and dialing the sheriff's office. Within minutes, deputies arrived to assess the situation. Though no arrests were made, the officers warned the protesters to stay clear of the fence and respect John's boundaries. For a brief moment, the crowd dispersed, but John knew they'd be back. Amid the chaos, public opinion remained divided. Letters to the editor poured into the local newspaper, some supporting John and others siding with the HOA. Neighbors who had once been friendly now avoided him altogether, while others whispered behind his back. Even customers at the feed store where John shopped regularly gave him sideways glances, unsure whether to sympathize or condemn. The isolation weighed heavily on him, but he found solace in the unwavering support of a few close friends and family members who believed in his cause. As the weeks dragged on, John realized this fight wasn't just about the land. It was about principles. Was he willing to sacrifice peace with his neighbors to stand up for what he believed was right? The answer, though painful, was clear. Yes. He couldn't, and wouldn't let anyone take away the dream he'd worked so hard to achieve. The electrified fence stood tall, a silent testament to his resolve, while the legal battle raged on. Whatever happened next, John knew one thing for certain. He was ready to see this through to the end. Just when John Harper thought he was fighting this battle alone, fate intervened in the form of an unexpected ally. One afternoon, as he was hauling hay into the barn, a car pulled up his driveway. Out stepped Sarah Mitchell, a retired judge who lived a few miles away. She was known in the community for her sharp mind and no-nonsense demeanor, but she had always kept to herself. John had met her only briefly at HOA meetings, where she rarely spoke. "John," she said, approaching him with a warm yet firm smile, "I've been following what's happening with your ranch. I think you could use some help." Caught off guard, John set down the bale of hay and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Help? Ma'am, I appreciate it, but I've already got a lawyer." "I know," Sarah interrupted gently. "Lisa is good, but let me offer something different. I've dealt with cases like this before, and I can spot a weak argument from a mile away. If you'll let me, I'd like to assist in reviewing the HOA's claims, free of charge." Her offer was hard to refuse. John nodded gratefully, inviting her inside to discuss the details. Over coffee at his kitchen table, Sarah listened intently as John recounted everything. The letter from the HOA, the electrified fence, the protests, and the mounting legal fees. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Their claim doesn't hold water," she said confidently. "These so-called community land designations are often based on outdated or misinterpreted laws. Let's dig deeper." True to her word, Sarah dove headfirst into the case. With her expertise, they uncovered critical evidence that turned the tide in John's favor. They found archived maps showing that the trails in question hadn't existed until decades after John's property was first deeded. Even more damning, they discovered emails between HOA board members discussing how to exploit vague zoning laws to expand their control over member properties. It became clear this wasn't about preserving community access. It was about power. Armed with this revelation, John and his team filed a counter-lawsuit against the HOA, accusing them of harassment, defamation, and misuse of authority. The move sent shockwaves through the organization. Board members scrambled to defend themselves, but cracks began to form within their ranks. Some members distanced themselves publicly, claiming ignorance of the board's tactics. Others resigned outright, unwilling to be associated with the controversy any longer. The once united HOA fractured under scrutiny, its reputation tarnished. The turning point came during a tense mediation session. Facing mounting pressure, Roger, the HOA president, tried to negotiate a compromise, offering to drop their claims if John agreed to grant limited trail access. But John, bolstered by Sarah's counsel, refused to budge. "This isn't about compromise," he said firmly. "It's about accountability. You tried to take what wasn't yours, and now you're paying the price." Word of the internal strife within the HOA leaked to the public, shifting public opinion further in John's favor. Local news outlets reported on the scandal, highlighting how the association had overstepped its bounds. Protesters, sensing the weakening resolve of their cause, began to lose steam. The banners came down, the marches dwindled, and eventually, the camps near John's property disappeared altogether. Though the fight wasn't over yet, John felt a renewed sense of hope. With Sarah's guidance and Lisa's relentless advocacy, he knew he stood a real chance of winning, not just for himself, but for anyone else who might face similar injustice. For the first time in months, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. He still had hurdles ahead, but he was no longer alone. Together, they were ready to bring the HOA to justice. The courtroom was quiet except for the faint rustle of papers and the rhythmic tapping of the judge's pen against the bench. John Harper sat alongside Lisa Martinez and Sarah Mitchell, his heart pounding but his resolve unshaken. Across the aisle, the HOA board members exchanged nervous glances, their usual confidence replaced by unease. Months of preparation had led to this moment, the final verdict that would decide the fate of John's ranch. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was calm but authoritative. After reviewing all evidence presented in this case, she began, "It is clear that the plaintiff's claims regarding community land are unsubstantiated. The defendant, Mr. Harper, holds lawful ownership of the disputed property. Furthermore, the actions taken by the HOA constitute harassment and misuse of power." She paused, looking directly at the HOA representatives. "This court rules in favor of Mr. Harper." The room seemed to freeze for a second before reality sank in. John exhaled deeply, relief washing over him like a wave. Lisa squeezed his shoulder, grinning from ear to ear, while Sarah nodded approvingly, her sharp eyes gleaming with satisfaction. On the other side, the HOA president, Roger, slumped in his seat, defeated. Whispers rippled through the gallery as people absorbed the ruling. With the legal battle won, John returned home to his ranch, eager to reclaim the peace he'd fought so hard to protect. He kept the electrified fence up temporarily, just to ensure there were no lingering attempts to trespass. But over time, as tensions eased, he replaced it with sturdy wooden fencing, marking his boundaries clearly without the need for shock value. To mend fences, not just literal ones, but also relationships, John took steps to rebuild trust within the community. He invited neighbors for a barbecue on his land, not out of obligation, but as a gesture of goodwill. Some declined, still harboring resentment, but others accepted. Among them was Carl, the outspoken neighbor who had once been one of John's fiercest critics. As they stood together near the grill, flipping burgers and sharing small talk, Carl admitted, "You really didn't deserve how we treated you. I hope you can forgive us." John nodded, appreciating the effort. "We're all human," he said simply. "Mistakes happen. What matters is moving forward." In an effort to find common ground, John agreed to allow limited access to certain trails, but only under strict conditions. He drafted formal agreements ensuring he retained full control over his property and required visitors to sign waivers acknowledging his rules. This compromise satisfied both sides. The community gained some access, while John maintained sovereignty over his land. Life on the ranch slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could be after such a storm. John continued tending to his animals, planting crops, and enjoying the solitude he cherished. Yet he carried a new sense of vigilance, aware that battles like this could arise again if he let his guard down. In the end, John became something of a local legend, a symbol of standing firm against injustice. Strangers stopped by occasionally, asking to hear his story or thanking him for inspiring them to fight for their own rights. Though the conflict had left scars, it also taught him valuable lessons about resilience, community, and the importance of protecting what truly mattered. As he stood on his porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, John felt a profound sense of gratitude. His ranch was more than just land. It was proof that determination and integrity could overcome even the toughest challenges. And though the road ahead might have its bumps, he knew he'd face them with the same courage that had brought him this far.